Prithvi Shantirantariksha Shantir Dyav Shantir Disha Shantiravantara Disha Shantiragni Shantir Vayu Shantiraditya Shantish Chandrama Shantir Nakshatrani Shantirapah Shantiroshadaya Shantir Vanaspataya Shantir Gau Shantiraja Shantirashva Shantir Purusha Shantir Brahma Shantir Brahmana Shantir Shantireva Shanti Shantir Me Astu Shantihi. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu, sarve santu niramayaha, sarve bhadrani pashyantu, ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet, sarvastaratu durgani, sarvo bhadrani pashyatu, sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu, sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amrutam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. Last week we finished the reading of the welcome address that Swami Vivekananda gave at the Parliament of Religions. Now this little booklet that most of you have is not entirely representative of what Swami Vivekananda spoke. As it happens in many of these big conferences, there were a few plenary sessions. So this welcome address was given at the plenary session. And there is another one, it's called the paper on Hinduism. That was read also at the plenary session. But alongside these, there were several smaller panels held in that whole building. And Swami Vivekananda spoke or presided over several of these smaller panels. Now we don't have the transcripts of all of them. So I just want to let you know that this is not an exhaustive collection of what Swamiji spoke. But many of the major papers were covering the event. There was no television there, and so there's not of probably if the media were as pervasive and intrusive as it is today, we would have probably had a lot more photos and audio, video, and all of that. So, but the print media was much more active then, and they were covering the event. So through their reports, we get a better picture about what exactly transpired, and they give summary of what the different speakers spoke. So to get an idea, therefore, of the entire proceedings, I would strongly recommend, if you get a chance, to look at this volume. It's called Swami Vivekananda in the West, New Discoveries, by Mary Louise Burke. She was a Vedanta student for many years in our San Francisco Center. She passed away a few years ago. Sometime in the 1950s, I believe, that she came there. She's originally from New York area. She'd moved to West Coast, and she met with Swami Ashokananda there. And she became his student, and she wanted very much to do something. And so Swami asked her to undertake this research work. He had her take a course in journalism, and then it was in the 50s, so there were still people living who had met Swami Vivekananda, or those who had seen him when they were little children. And so she traveled throughout the country, went to all these newspaper offices, collected all the relevant paper cuttings, met with the families who had met or seen Swami Vivekananda or had lived at their place, asked them for their whatever family reminiscences from old diaries. And so this enormous amount of information she collected, and she put it all together in the 6 volumes of Swami Vivekananda in the West. It's fascinating. The first 2 volumes deal with his first visit to the United States, and a few trips to UK, to England he did. Volume 3 and 4 primarily deal with his stay in Europe, and 5 and 6 about during his second visit to the United States. Now, it's a big read, but what we are studying right now, it's all there in the volume 1. So if you get a chance, please take a look at this volume, Swami Vivekananda in the West by Mary Louise Burke. In fact, inside the order, she was much respected for her dedicated activity. In fact, she was given the name and preliminary monastic vow. She was known as Sister Gargi. So I would recommend that you take a look at this book. In addition to the information about the Parliament of Religion, especially those of us who live in New England area, the earlier sections give a great information about the time Swamiji spent in Boston, at Harvard, and in North Shore, along with photographs. And so we know what he did even before he spoke at the Parliament of Religion. So it's a very, very fascinating read. So before we move to the next one, I just want to read to you very briefly about how the different journals that had covered this opening address. So he mentions the reaction that happened on the following day. So there was this Mr. Mervyn Snell, who was the president of the... So in the... before I read that. So this parliament, which lasted for 17 days, so first 10 days of the Parliament of Religions was dedicated to the more abstract and speculative parts of religion. So what did the different religions think about God, heaven, what happens after death, incarnation, all of these theological aspects. And then the last 7 days were focusing on religion as it applied to the social situations, so society. So that was how the general division was. Also, throughout this parliament, they also had a section called the scientific section. Now, by scientific section, they really meant not necessarily religion and science as we think about it today, but the scientific section was where they discussed the more technical aspects of religion. I imagine probably went to more theological technicalities, where the specialists in religion would gather and want to know more about it. So the addresses we have here are more for the general section, most of them. And so where the speakers tended to recognize that their audience was of lay people who were not specialists, who hadn't necessarily studied all the technicalities on their own tradition, what to speak about some other tradition. So the very next day after this opening address was given, so these are some of the comments that were passed. So the head of the scientific section was Mr. Mervyn Snell. He wrote to Swamiji that Vivekananda was beyond question the most popular and influential man in the parliament, who on all occasions was received with greater enthusiasm than any other speaker, Christian or pagan. There's another one impression given here. The Congress of Religions was a triumph for all concerned, especially for its organizer, the Reverend John Barrows of Chicago's First Presbyterian Church, who had been preparing it for 2 years. When he brought down the gavel upon the world's first Parliament of Religions, a wave of breathless silence swept over the audience. It seemed a great moment in human history, prophetic of the promised new era of tolerance and peace. On the stage with him at his left was a black-coated array of bishops and ministers representing the various familiar Protestant sects and the Russian Orthodox and Roman Catholic churches. At his right, a brilliant group of strangely costumed dignitaries from afar, a Confucian from China, a Jain from India, a Theosophist from Allahabad, a white-robed Shinto priest from Japan, and 4 other Buddhists from Japan, and a monk of the orange robe from Bombay. And so this monk of the orange robe was Vivekananda. So it was the last of these, Vivekananda, the magnificent, who stole the whole show and captured the town. Others of the foreign groups spoke well. The Greek, the Russian, the Armenian, Mazumdar of Calcutta, Dharmapala of Ceylon. Ceylon is the present-day Sri Lanka. Leaning, some of these upon interpreters. Shibata, the Shinto, bowed his wired white headdress to the ground, spread his delicate hands in suave gestures, and uttered gravely, with serene politeness, his incomprehensible words. But the handsome monk in the orange robe gave us in perfect English a masterpiece. His personality, dominant, magnetic, his voice, rich as a bronze bell, the controlled fervor of his feeling, the beauty of his message to the Western world he was facing for the first time, these combined to give us a rare and perfect moment of supreme emotion. It was human eloquence at its highest pitch. So you have lots and lots of descriptions like this, very poetic, and they have a value because these words were written immediately, well, within hours of hearing the talk. Today we are able to appreciate it, but the words come to us in a kind of an edited text, separated by almost 125 years. So these first impressions are very, very fascinating. And about the other section that I was mentioning, just a small para. A picture of Swamiji at the Parliament would not be complete without some knowledge of his activities outside the plenary sessions, which by no means occupied his entire time. These days were strenuous for the delegates. Papers were read not only at the Parliament proper, but at side meetings. It is known, for instance, that Swamiji spoke at least 4 times at the erudite scientific section, which, as has been said, was opened on the 5th day. It is a great misfortune that these talks are missing from all known reports of the Parliament. Their dates and titles, however, are given by Barrows. On the morning of Friday, September 22nd, Swamiji addressed the section and conducted a conference on Orthodox Hinduism and the Vedanta philosophy. That afternoon, he and Mr. Snell conducted a conference on the modern religions of India. The following day, Swamiji again addressed the section and conducted a conference on the subject of the Rinzai Zen of Japanese Buddhism. On Monday afternoon, September 25th, he spoke on the essence of the Hindu religion. So again, we have titles of many of these talks, but we don't have the details. So if you are interested, and take a look at this book. So let's look at the second of the of the small talks that we have here on page 5. It's like why we disagree. We read in books that this was Swami was probably presiding over a panel discussion, and 3 other speakers had spoken before him. And so these were just the comments that Swamiji gave. We are not very sure about what the first 3 speakers spoke. It's to be assumed that what Swamiji was saying was something related to the kind of discussions or the points that were raised at that panel discussion. The story is well known, the story about the frog in the well. So let's just read the story and then let's see what thoughts come along with it. So it's titled, Why We Disagree. It's on 15th of September. That is 4 days after the welcome address. I will tell you a little story. You have heard the eloquent speaker who has just finished say, let us cease from abusing each other. And he was very sorry that there should be always so much variance. But I think I should tell you a story which would illustrate the cause of this variance. A frog lived in a well. It had lived there for a long time. It was born there and brought up there, and yet was a little small frog. Of course, the evolutionists were not there then to tell us whether the frog lost its eyes or not. But for a story's sake, we must take it for granted that it had its eyes and that it every day cleans the water of all the worms and bacilli that lived in it with an energy that would do credit to our modern bacteriologists. In this way, it went on and became a little sleek and fat. Well, one day, another frog that lived in the sea came and fell into the well. Where are you from? I'm from the sea. The sea? How big is that? Is it as big as my well? And he took a leap from one side of the well to the other. My friend, said the frog of the sea, how do you compare the sea with your little well? Then the frog took another leap and said, is your sea so big? What nonsense you speak, to compare the sea with your well. Well then, said the frog of the well, nothing can be bigger than my well. There can be nothing bigger than this. This fellow is a liar, so turn him out. That has been the difficulty all the while. I'm a Hindu, I'm sitting in my own little well and thinking that the whole world is my little well. The Christian sits in his little well and thinks the whole world is his well. The Mohammedan sits in his little well and thinks that that is the whole world. I have to thank you of America for the great attempt you are making to break down the barriers of this little world of ours, and hope that in the future the Lord will help you to accomplish your purpose. A small story known to all of us, but also provides a lot of thought for reflection. So while he's appreciative of the great attempt, this was the first time one would think, at least in known history, that, or probably at any point in history, considering that in the olden days they didn't have such means of travel across the globe. I mean, even during Swamiji's time, it wasn't as easy as it is today. There wasn't jet travel, but at least people could take the ships and come. So it was the first time in known human history that you had these religious leaders from all over the world come and exchange thoughts and ideas. And so Swamiji appreciates that. And then he also hopes that the attempts that are being made to break the barrier, and in future, Lord will help you to accomplish your purpose. So here are a few questions, and then feel free to share what you feel about it. Will this purpose ever be accomplished? And I'm not speaking merely about the wells of religions that separate one from the other. We know that the walls that are created dividing humanity are not only on the basis of religion. Well, religion is one powerful force, no doubt. But there are walls based on political ideologies, on race, on color, on class, on culture, on language, and religion, of course. So, will these barriers be ever removed, or will these walls forever remain? That's one question. Second question is, what does this story, the frog in the well, what do I learn from it when I try to apply it to my own life? One thing that seems obvious to me is, if we take this story to heart, it should make us humble. I think humility would be a natural outcome if we really take this story to heart. Recognizing that there is such a vast, almost infinite field of knowledge. There are so many things to know that no matter how much of a genius a person might be, there is a limit to how much we can know in life. How much we can know about our own traditions, our own culture, our own thing. And then, of course, the limitations about knowing something different than what we are familiar with. And recognizing the limitations of our knowledge, the limited information available to us, to then come to very definitive judgments about others. I think that's where this frog in the well thing is, that why we are constantly trying to judge others. We might know a little bit about our own little well, but we know so little, or very, very little, about where the other frog is coming from. And what Swamiji is really looking forward to, and what we all can look forward to, is the more the number of people with that recognition that, yes, I'm in my own little well, but I want to know about these other enclosures. And if I can broaden my understanding, maybe one day I might just go for a visit to the other well or to the ocean. Not necessarily to go and move there permanently. I can if I like it, but I can come back to my own little well, but with a much broader vision about the extent of the world, rather than just thinking it's about me. So one thought that came to me right away was being humble, being humility. But I think I'll stop here at this moment. So let's take up this first question about, what does this story mean to you? What thought comes to your mind when you read this story? In what way will this story be helpful to us in our individual lives, but also in a collective life? And this was the first question. The second question we will see about is whether there'll ever be a time when all these wells will be removed and there'll be just this one ocean. So, but the first question, what do you think? What are your thoughts about this story? Yeah.
The effect of this story on individual level will have some effect. We can learn something, we can try something, so that we can understand the areas of other faiths, other culture. But in collective way, I see it has failed. I don't remember or any time in the history where this story was manifested in the society. And in my personal life, I have practiced going to the other wells, and I was rewarded. And I feel very happy because I could do that.
Oh, that's good. All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Vivek? Yeah.
I mean, for me, it seems that we're imprisoned in the well because we built the walls of the well ourselves. It's our own impressions. And when we get rid of these impressions through our practice, we find that we have been in the sea all along. We just didn't know it because we imprisoned ourselves in the well.
Okay.
I guess this is not a sharing story, but one of the first things that came to my mind is Swamiji mentioned that Hinduism was the mother of all religions, but then he says that it's also a well. So I was wondering if that is, what's your thoughts on that?
Just speak slowly and loudly so we can.
Sorry.
I couldn't hear what you said.
One of the first thoughts that came into my mind was Swamiji mentioned in the welcome address that Hinduism was the mother of all religions. But then I was wondering, he also compares it to a well at the same time. Compared to a well at the same time.
Yep.
So I was wondering how that makes sense.
Yeah, so as I said, that the word mother of all religions can be understood at different levels. Historically, as we know, at least from our timeline, historically, Hinduism is among the oldest religions of the world. And so, any new thought, in some ways you could say, is never grows up in a vacuum. Any founder of any religious ideology or even philosophy, it's never in a vacuum. So they are building on whatever current thought currents are there, and they might have something to say of their own, add something original and create something new. And so in some sense, whatever is ancient is in some ways a mother of everything that has come. So that is another way to understand that. And a third way to understand that mother of religions is to just understand that it's simply spirituality. That every religion, including Hinduism, every religion is only a specific manifestation of the spirituality, which is not then limited to any one personality or just one conceptual framework. Okay? Yeah.
Swamiji, so in some respects, it seems as though the frog misses the point where the frog is focused on a single dimension, on size. So the frog is focused on size of one well compared to size of a sea, but rather if the frog was open and they engaged in a discussion, he would realize that in this well there is water, in the sea there is water, and the discussion could be on the similarities between water, which is something we've heard many times, that ultimately it's actually all the same if you break it down to the core element, not get stuck on one dimension.
Sure, absolutely. That makes sense. One other thing about, Vivek, when you mentioned about that we build the walls, there's also a way to look at it is because that we may not have much choice, in the sense that because our present identity is that we are finite beings, so because my knowledge is limited, the extent of my knowledge, where my knowledge ends, that is the wall really. And so unless and until I transcend my own limitations, the wall is going to remain. And so even while the wall remains, I can have the humility to recognize, because my knowledge is not complete, that there may be things beyond the wall. Do not think that the wall is the end of the world. So that was my idea about the wall. Said the wall is probably, it's a little bit like the capacity of our eyes to see things. Now, because the eye can see, and even if it's like a flat land, the visibility, there is a limit to how far my vision can go. Maybe there's some distant mountains, maybe I might be able to see. But if there are some tiny objects, say even 500 feet away, I may not be able to see that object. Now, just because I don't see it, for me to be so sure that I don't see it, therefore it's not there, that would be a problem. All that I can say is, I'm not able to see it, but I recognize the limitations of how far my eyes can see, and then at least accept the possibility that things could be there, but I don't know about it. I think that's what I meant by humility, to recognize our limitations and the possibility of it. And so it will take away a lot of the dogmatism that we have. And the dogmatism exists in every field, even in science, but we see it in religion per se, because people can be fighting and arguing and sometimes coming to blows, talking about this is how God is or this is how God must be. And it's possible that neither of them has had any experience of God. So essentially, we are just fighting over what I read in my book about what you have read in your book, or what my belief system is and your belief system is. Sri Ramakrishna used to tell the story about within the Hindu tradition, there are all these different deities, and so the worshippers of Shiva, the worshippers of Vishnu. And so there was this big debate going on between, someone said, Shiva is the greatest, he is the only deity, and Vishnu is the greatest, the only deity. And they asked one person, the other person said, I have no idea. I've not met either of them, so I'm not in a position to say who is who. So I think, arguing about these abstract issues about which we don't have any direct personal knowledge or experience, we'll have to be humble. At the very least, we can recognize that my way of seeing things, my way of understanding things may work for me. But for me to expect that just because it works for me, it should work for everybody, that's a problem. Like there's a certain kind of food that agrees with me, and for me to then say, think about it this way. If you now go to a restaurant and there's some particular dish you like, and you tell the restaurant, that's the only dish you're going to serve, nothing else from your menu, that doesn't work, because different people have different tastes. And so, yeah, that's basically how I see it. To not think that one other thought, by the way, is why would people feel threatened? I spoke about humility, but here's another thought. When this frog sees some other frog come, and maybe he looks a little different, maybe he's bigger, or maybe he's accustomed to living in salt water, so he has got certain different ways of doing things than one who lives in fresh water. Why would this frog feel threatened by meeting another frog, which is a frog but a little bit different? Which is really our situation. We meet people, they are also human beings, but a little different. Maybe different in the way their belief system, or different in the way they look. Maybe there be racial differences, religious differences, cultural differences. So we recognize they are human beings, but we recognize they are different. Now, why would I feel threatened by that difference? Why would I feel threatened when I see someone else doing things differently or thinking differently? And I think that at least one reason I could feel threatened is if I believe that there is only one right way. There is only one correct thing. And I believe the way I think, the way I do, whatever I do, that's the right thing. The moment now I see someone doing things differently, thinking differently, or different in some form, if I have a little bit of insecurity within me, then something within my heart will say, if this other person who is different, if that person is right, then I could be wrong because I'm doing things differently. And now that recognition that if that person is right, I could be wrong, could generate different kind of reactions. In some it could say, let me get to know what that person thinks or what that person believes or what that person does, and I might be able to compare. I have some thinking capacity and then decide for myself which makes better sense to me. Or the other reaction could be, I'm right and I don't want to now change the way I think, but I still feel threatened by this different way of doing and thinking. So the only way I can do is eliminate the other person. Take care of the other person, as the mob might say. And so the best way to eliminate difference is destroy the difference. So then there is nobody who is different from me, then I can feel very secure, mine is the right way. So I think insecurity probably plays a big role in feeling threatened by diversity. But what do you think? Is there any other reasons why people might feel threatened? Giovanni?
I think that at the end is really because it's like it's like when you argue, you don't want to argue. Like when other people think like you feel like among your peers, it's like you're afraid to be put in a bad light, like to be proven wrong, and then I think you're right.
No, say that I couldn't get it.
I think that exactly what you said, it really makes sense. I don't know if it could be something else, but yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Ashish and then you,
Swamiji, to answer your question, I had two comments. One was to answer your question. I feel when I am interacting with somebody who doesn't look like me or is different in ways, at least for me, I think about whether what I say is going to offend this person. Am I going to be able to relate to this person? How will this person think about me if I say something which might appear stupid to this person? All these thoughts. So that creates some kind of a barrier, or not free and open, because I'm concerned that what I want to say, will that other person understand as I want to say it, or will it be interpreted differently? Right. So that's one thought that comes to me. But Swamiji, going back to the frog in the well, one other thing that came to my mind was, earlier Swamiji mentions that this frog took pride in every day cleaning the water of all the worms and bacilli. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like it's a karma yogi, right? He is basically he's doing as best he can to keep his abode, his place of living clean. And I was thinking, that's karma yoga, but then he's attached to his well. Oh, I'm keeping it so well, and this must be the best well because I'm working so hard at it. So I'm thinking, there's another lesson there to me that, focus on the work, not get attached to the results of the work, which caused the pride, and then he reacted like that to the other frog.
I think that's a very good point. Yeah, he said nothing can be bigger than my well. So he thinks this is the place. Good point. Yeah. Good point.
Swamiji, in addition to your point, what you said, right or wrong, I feel maybe another emotion it works is ego. Here again, because the frog thinks this is the biggest of all. And if someone comes and says, no, I have even bigger than yours, then it's my ego to accept that fact, or someone has something better than me, than mine.
Yeah.
then it's my ego that okay,
True,
and
that's
I am
true.
the best, or whatever I have, it is the best.
That's very true. Very true. That sometime in human nature we want whatever I have or whatever I do or whichever I think, like that should be the best. The moment I see someone else which could be potentially the best, then there is some reaction within. It's like, no, I want to be the best. So yeah, an ego definitely plays a role in that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think there's a couple aspects of the person in the well. One is to connect with someone else in a positive way. To a certain degree, you have to be free of certain fears, and one fear is the ego. I'm not the best person, or I'm not the best, or this is not the best thing. So it's a fear of not being good enough or right in that sense. The other thing is if you want to connect with someone, there's also the issue of a fear of not understanding reality, because the reality is beyond what you have, and so what you know all of a sudden is challenged. So it's fear of not knowing when you go beyond it. And then the other potential fear, which would be a real fear, is that the other person may be different and may come at you and penetrate you or beyond your boundaries. That's a real sense there. So it's hard to potentially connect there. And so to create a sense of, which gets back to your second point of could you ever have it be eventually come together, it's a combination of either reducing fears or creating opportunities, to connect or love or a sense of unity, and the difference between the unity and the diversity of one well versus another, and so on. So I think it's a combination of things, part of that.
Yeah, that's all good points. That's very true. They're all combination. Shrikant, yeah.
Looking at another point where the frog in the well, it is comparing the size of the well to the size of the sea. It is only one property. So it is possible that why it should feel a small well is something bad or worse than sea. It can say that, okay, my water is fresh water, it's good for health, and sea's water is not good. So still it can be proud of whatever it is, and it doesn't have to get threatened by looking at somebody else's sea.
Yeah.
So both can exist, and both can be good in a different dimension.
Yeah, I mean, the way this story is, it doesn't even feel as if that other frog from the sea is threatening him. It just seems very friendly, actually. He said, where are you from? I'm from the sea. And he even addresses them, my friend, how do you do it? So it's not like, oh, I've come to take over the well and now kill you or anything like that. Yes.
Swamiji, another thought came to my mind that when we see something, and at least I can speak for myself, that I have a fear to say I don't know, because I don't know means it's a weakness. And even though I admit that whoever I'm seeing is way better than me, but I admit that, but I cannot say that I don't know. To avoid that negativity or weakness, I try to avoid that. So that's also a fear. But it's not true that I do not admit that there is a better things available.
That's true. That's very true. And that's a good point. That I think it's not, when you said I don't know, I really like that, because it needs a little bit of confidence to be able to say, even in a conversation with friends or something, I don't know this. Because I can guarantee you, none of the people in that group are all knowing. There are a lot of things they don't know also. And so to say I don't know something is not necessarily belittling yourself. In fact, as I said, that only a strong person can say I don't know. And that's the thing. Humility is the characteristic of the strong. It's only really strong people who can afford to be truly humble. So a lot of these kind of an arrogance and don't care attitude and kind of a external show of bravado that many people make, that's not because they are strong. It's a way to actually mask the inner weakness. To cover the inner weakness, people want to make a show of strength outside. But the person who is really strong doesn't need to have that mask. So which person can be very humble. The Swami Vivekananda in another one talk mentions this one point, and he said that there was this one big bull was sitting in one place, and one small little mosquito came and sat on that bull's horn for a while. And then after that, the mosquito felt a little guilty. And then he told that bull, I hope I'm not causing you a lot of inconvenience. I've been sitting here for a long time. And the bull says, no problem, you can bring your whole family and sit there as long as you want. Now, Swamiji just mentioned this to show that if you are really that strong, compared to a bull and a mosquito, if you're really that strong, you can be very forgiving. You can not get offended. So people who get offended, getting offended is actually a sign of weakness. That doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that the other person says. It's possible to completely disagree with someone and yet be very civil, yet be very kind, yet be very, you can sit and enjoy a cup of coffee with someone even if you are in total disagreement with that person. So disagreement doesn't necessarily mean enmity. I think that's where we can say, if that's how we think and that's how we try to live, then we can say a certain amount of wisdom or maturity is coming in our life. But if we just want to be surrounded by people whom I like and whom I agree with, that means I'm not that strong. I think that's one way to think. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Anish and then Aritra? Yeah.
So Swamiji, the thought that comes to my mind is I tend to link this one with the first lecture at the welcome. And so, the thought that comes to mind is that, the truth is one and people call it by different names. And so, it's just giving that frog in the small well, the reason to believe that it's okay to be in a small well. If you have that reason to believe that you're the same as the person in the other well and so forth, at a basic level, it's all the same anyway. That, it gives that person, if they believe that, then they can have some strength because they can believe that what they're doing is right, even though it's different from somebody else's way of thinking. So that's what comes to mind.
Yep, very true, very true. Aritra.
I think one other reason that the frog in the well might feel so challenged is because that worldview that he has, he feels that it's so core to its identity that seeing something different, it just automatically triggers this emotional reaction that's actually very counterproductive. So being able to sort of see the fear, being able to, there's this sort of fear in the back of your mind, which you're not necessarily aware of having to give up your worldview. And so being able to sort of process your emotions intelligently in that type of situation is, I think, very important. So there's this thing you have to consider between, following your emotions and following reason sometimes. Yeah. And it's also possible that that the frog doesn't have to pick one well for another in this type of situation. There could be certain attributes of one well that he might like, and certain attributes of the other well. So it might be possible to even kind of expand your worldview sometimes in certain ways, but people sometimes don't. People sometimes take the emotional route towards this, and becomes counterproductive. Yeah.
Yeah, true. Very true. Very true. So the other frog was from the sea. Now, I think Swamiji probably meant that it's come from a different place. I mean, if you take it very literally, what do you think? Will the frog from the sea have any idea of the sea? If you take it literally, I mean, how far can a frog go? I mean, so all that the frog, if that frog has still remained frog, then it's a different place, maybe a little bigger than this well, but I don't think a frog has an idea about the extents of the sea itself. Now, so this whole story is not just obviously about just the frogs, right? So if we apply it now individually about who we are, so from the Vedantic concept, now if we say, every one of us will say, I'm a human being. Now even our human identity can be seen as being in a well that is, the walls of the well are my physical and mental dimensions. Psychophysical dimension, that's the wall. And so in some sense, we are all in our own wells. Now getting into the sea, again, a sea in an ideal sort of way. By sea, but think about an ocean. Again, I mean, even an ocean is a limited entity, but in this particular instance, think about going outside the well in a space which has no boundaries. That is essentially what the Atman is, the spirit is. So, my human identity is being in a well, and the divine, who we see as boundless, all-pervading, omnipresent, omniscient, in every respect there are no boundaries. So how can I get out of this well of human identity and into that ocean of the divine identity? And what keeps me inside this wall of the human identity is just looking upon myself as a human being. So as long as this frog thinks of himself or herself or whatever the gender of that frog was, that I'm a frog who is a well frog, and that is the sea frog. So these qualifiers, well frog or a sea frog, these qualifiers have to go. So a dog body or a cat body or a human body, essentially these are all qualifiers. Now essentially within all of them, just like as Vikram you said about there's a water being common, whether it's in the well or the sea. So what Vedanta would say is, well, the water here, again, just go with this analogy. The water here is just pure consciousness. And so irrespective of the walls that we create, thinking about this is my consciousness limited within this body and mind, when I'm able to transcend this wall, I then belong to the whole ocean. So frog in the well can be, this story can be applied, even in a philosophical sense, to see how our limited identity can be transcended to become the infinite. So this is really still at a different level. More than the distinctions of the religion and caste and culture and all of those things that we said. This is just about the differences in our identity itself. And so, again, there are these different ways we can look upon. So as you can see, the simple story, a story we are familiar with, and yet the more we try to dwell on it, there are so many thoughts come and so many thoughts which can be helpful to us. And I'll just conclude with just one idea. When Swamiji here speaks about to break down the barriers of this little world of ours and hope that in the future, the Lord will help you to accomplish your purpose. Maybe we can discuss this further next time. I'm sure this topic will come up again later on in the book. Whether this purpose will ever be accomplished, whether there'll ever be a time in this world when there'll be no walls of any kind. And the Vedantic approach to this is, if that time comes, then the world will not be the world as we know it. In other words, as long as the world as we understand it exists, chances are it's not going to happen. Just one story came to my mind, so I'm just going to mention that. So this happened in Swami Vivekananda's childhood. And that was when they were maybe there was 5, 6, 7-year-old kids. So they used to go in the neighborhood, as sometimes children would do. And those were the days when there were lots of trees, not like today. And so in their, in the neighborhood, in the backyard, the family had a big tree with lots of branches. And all these children would go and play on the trees and swing on the branches and have a lot of fun. Now, the family didn't like all these neighborhood children coming and playing there. And there was also the worry that some of them might fall down and, there could be chaos. So the grandfather in that family, the patriarch of the family, he once came and told all these children, don't come on this tree. A demon or a ghost. There is a ghost on this tree. And whoever goes on top of this tree and spends time there, the ghost will come and wring your neck. And all the children were terrified when they heard. Because Vivekananda, his name was Narendra then, he wasn't present that day. And so next day he comes and says, come on, let's go and play. And all these children are like, no, we can't go there. There is a terrible ghost there. And then Narendra, we read in his biography, Narendra just simply goes up fearlessly on top and starts playing. And others are like, no, come down, the ghost will come and take you. And Narendra said, look at it this way. The ghost, that person didn't tell you the ghost has arrived just yesterday or today. He said the ghost always lives there. And we have already played here so long. If the ghost was really there, he would have finished us long back. The fact that it hasn't been done, that means there is no ghost. Now, I mention this only because if it were possible any time that this whole world, everything is going to be harmonious, everything is going to be perfect, there's going to be no disagreement and no walls, if it were possible, it probably would have happened by this time. We have been around for millions of years. The fact that it hasn't happened doesn't give us much hope that it's going to happen in the next 50 years or 100 years or even maybe 1,000 years. And if we look at history, what we see is that any one era is not that different from any other era. The details might vary, some particulars might be different, but if you see the broad pattern of not just human life, but lives of countries, life of civilizations, it's a very familiar pattern. There are these ups, everything goes fine, the things go down, it goes up and goes down. That's how it is. And so, which is why, well, two things. First, history repeats itself because we don't learn from history. That's why things go in the same way. Secondly, we do see great reformers coming in every country, in every part of the world at different points in history and doing great work. And so when these reformers come, they help to kind of lift the society in whichever field they are working, tend to make things a little bit better. And then afterwards, it's all kind of get diluted, it all goes down, then more reformers come, and then it goes. So the world as we see kind of goes on this way. So there was a thought current which said that the amount of good in the world is a continually increasing quantity. And if we keep on eliminating evil gradually, a time will come when all evil will go away and only good will remain. Now it's a very good motivational power, but I don't think history will agree with that. More or less, there seems to be some kind of a balance between good and evil. Sometimes the good seems a little bit more, sometimes an evil seems a little bit more. But they never seem to, none of them cancel out the other. So, is there any hope or not? And the Vedantic approach to it is, the world outside will not change. But if I deal with the world intelligently, wisely, in a selfless way, that's what spiritual or disciplined life is. If I can do that, I can change. I can transcend. I can go beyond good and evil. But the objective world may not change. So that's one way of thinking. We will discuss this a lot more in the days and weeks ahead. Om Jananim Saratam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. On Sunday, for the satsang, our subject will be worship of Mother Durga. So we'll study about the worship, and a week after that, we will actually do the worship. So don't mistake this for Durga Puja, because the title somehow could be, if you don't read it carefully. So this is a discussion about what the significance and meaning of the worship is, in preparation for the worship that we will do in the first week of October. Next week, we'll continue with this study, and on Tuesday and Saturday, our meditations will also continue as usual. So let's conclude with a prayer now on page 3. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.